In this whole wide world there's no happier bloke. Oh, chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chimney. A sweep is as lucky can be. Chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chimney. Good luck will rub off when I shake hands with you. Oh! Here we are in chapter 2. We're going to be talking about the right hand, or most of the functions that the right hand serves. And I would say you're probably going to end up in one of two worlds. The right hand's job is to either strum up and down like this, or it's going to be doing some kind of banjo-like finger roll motion. So sometimes I just call it chicken picking because I like the way chicken picking sounds. So you're going to be doing some kind of motion like this or up and down. And let's talk a little bit about each one of those worlds. So strumming patterns, the first and foremost important concept to master strumming patterns is understanding when to strum down and up, at least on the ukulele. I'm sure it's the same for guitar. Crazy enough as it sounds, I don't actually play a lot of guitar. But this is done. Knowing whether to go up or down is by being cognizant of the quote-unquote strong and weak beats in the measure or in your groove. And the examples that we'll cover later on show you how to interpret these measures and how to interpret these grooves so that your strumming pattern feels more natural. And even though sometimes when you're in the middle of the measure, you'll find you'll have to double the hand. Sometimes you're doing a downstroke twice because you're compensating for what's going to happen later on, a beat or two later, so that when you reach the next measure, or when the groove repeats itself, you're doing the same thing each time. And you have to sometimes make that idiosyncratic sacrifice in the middle of a measure so that's possible. Another little detail about strumming, this is more of a basic thing, but I should cover it because it does bother me with my students, is don't get lazy when you're strumming. When you strum, some people just kind of throw the hand down when they're playing a C chord, and they never really get that last string down here. So make sure that last string rings like the rest of them. Instead of, I can barely hear that last string. And at first, you're going to have to kind of, in a clumsy, awkward way, overemphasize that until your hand really gets used to kind of scraping through all that. So that's strumming. Picking, as I said, your right hand, when you're doing picking, is either going to be kind of doing like a little plucking motion, usually with the thumb, as you're playing a melody over here, like... So I'm just kind of plucking along with my thumb. It's going to be doing that a lot of the times, or it's going to be doing what I mentioned, like that banjo finger-like roll. So when I forgot to mention earlier, when I strum, some people strum with the thumb. They do like a downward flesh part of the thumb and then up with the fingernail. Some people go down with the thumb and up with the finger. Me personally, my go-to strum is just with the fingernail of my index finger, and then let the fleshy part on the way up. But I've done combinations of all of them. As far as I know, there's not a right way or a wrong way. Some parts of music call for one way, other parts call for another. It's kind of up for you to work that out. But as far as I know, there isn't really a proper way. Other people have asked if ukuleles use a pick, and me personally, generally no. However, I'm not against it, and I have seen plenty of people do it. And even though I personally don't really prefer to use one, there have been times where I needed one. So, do you use a pick? I would say me personally no, but a general answer I would say sure. I don't recall ever using a pick myself for strumming. But yeah, if I'm plunking out melodies or doing something that I want a specific type of sound, then sure. So before we get into these right hand techniques, let's break down the way that a measure or a groove is usually divided. And if you don't know this already, I'll go over it quickly, because it's really important to understand this strong beat versus weak beat idea. Because it really does determine the fluidity and the consistency of your strumming pattern. Below here you'll see a figure with a basic 4 on the floor strumming pattern, just a 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of deal. And most music educators, or if you go on tutorial, they're going to break down a measure in terms of numbers. And any note that lands on a number, so 1, 2, 3, or 4, is given, or any note that is a strong beat or a downbeat receives the numerical title of a number. So 1, 2, 3, or 4. And most notes that land on weak beats are going to get a syllable title, like and or e or and if this doesn't make sense to you, when you look more into tutorials on how to learn that, you'll have more luck with that. I'm just kind of whipping through it real fast. It's one of those things that's kind of difficult to explain, in 2 or 3 minutes. You have to kind of watch a couple lessons on it. Now, a violin, stringed instruments like a violin or a cello, they use an up bow or down bow symbol, and which for a violin, down bow is like that, up bow is up this way. I'm thinking about it the same way with the ukulele. I might have been the one to think about this or to consider using these symbols. Maybe it's been done before, I'm not sure, but I'm doing it. So if you see a down bow symbol, that means you're going down toward the floor. If you see an up bow symbol, then you're going up, kind of like you're fanning yourself. You're going up this way towards your face. And a down bow symbol on a violin looks kind of like a square missing the bottom line, or maybe like a house with no roof. And then an up bow looks like the letter V. And generally speaking, to keep the consistency of your strumming pattern, at the beginning of a measure, we almost always go down bow, because it sort of just feels right. It feels natural. Okay, so taking a look at this figure here, you'll see the G major chord, you'll see the 4 on the floor, and you have, if I'm playing all downbeats, then you're going to be counting in numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm actually going to use my index finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, and those are down beats, which just so happens to coincidentally coincide with the down motion of your strumming pattern. And then up beats are usually an up motion. So in the second measure, you have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Like that. And that's the gist of how you break down a measure, how you break down a groove, at least if you want to do it in the theoretical sort of scientific way. Let's take a look at something a little more complicated. So the next figure that you're going to see has a beat that's silent. And just because a beat is silent doesn't mean that you eliminate the numerical, title, or that you take out the beat name. If it's silent, you still have to count that beat when it's there. And when you look at this figure, you'll notice it says 1, 2, and then there's a rest note where there should be the number 3 and 4 and. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 and. And in your mind, you should still understand that empty beat is also like an invisible downward strum. So this means that the next audible strum that you play should be going upwards, even though it's sort of counterintuitive because the last strum you did on number 2 was also up. So you're going to go down, up, and then you got to bring your hand back down again because you're going to go up, down, up. And when you finish that measure, you're poised and ready to do a down strum again. So here's an example. That's the measure that you see there. Down, up. Here comes an up, even though I feel like I want to go down. And I find that most of my students have the most problems with this when it comes to the strumming. It takes them a long time to figure out how to make that work. And like I mentioned, a young player, and when I say young, I mean young in the development sense, not the chronological sense. They make the mistake of playing the beat on beat number 3 down, and then they'll find that now they're going down, up, down, up, down, and then the next measure they're starting, everything's reversed. Up, down, up, down, up. So you gotta, as you're learning your strumming patterns and as you're working your way through a song, you're gonna feel that awkwardness if you end up going to the next measure and everything is reversed, and it's gonna mess you up. So taking care of this problem will relieve the burden that you have of trying to juggle all of these things at once and then not having to add this unnecessary complexity. All right, this becomes even more clear when you see the examples that are coming up now. You'll see that we have all of the strong beats, the down beats have a down bow indicator on them, and all of the weak beats or the up bow beats have the up bow indicator. And I should mention that strong beats and weak beats don't mean, I'm not speaking of strong and weak in terms of volume. I'm speaking of strong and weak in terms of the weight of the groove. Like when you're listening to a song and your head goes like this, most likely your head's doing this because you're synchronizing with the strongest part of the groove, the strongest part of the beat. So both of these examples that you're looking at are actually the same groove, but one example is better than the other. Another instrument that deals with this problem a lot is drums, because when you're playing, drummers, if they can help it, whenever they're playing something, you want to make it where the next measure is starting on the same hand and feels the same as the one before, especially when you're doing stuff that's going by really fast. And for most drummers, their right hand is their dominant hand, so most passages start with their right hand. So this means that during play, they have to repeat a stroke with the same hand to balance out the measure sometimes. So sometimes in the middle of the measure, you're going to have two left hands in a row because, like I mentioned earlier, later on, it's going to end up benefiting you because you're going to be on the right hand when you start the next measure. For a drummer, having to begin the next measure on the opposite hand is the equivalent of the ukulele having to begin the next measure on the opposite stroke, and it feels awkward. Okay, so here's the example I'm giving here. If you look at your book there, you'll see that we have a rhythm that sounds like this. So, and then it repeats. If I were to repeat that a couple times, okay, but I'm doing all downstrokes right now. If I follow what you see on the page, down, up, this is the case where I'm talking about where you have two ups in a row. Up, down, and then my hand is ready to go up again to start the measure again. So this is, you'll see right there in the center, I have two ups in a row just to relieve the issue that's coming up. Now, am I saying this way is the only right way? No, I mean, you're going to experiment as you play through stuff and figure out what works best. That's the way I would play it, especially if you're going fast. And if I had to do it 8 times in a row, that would work out the best. As opposed to what you see coming up next, where I have the same rhythm, but now I've eliminated the double direction stroke. So you have down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and then I'm stuck now because I got to start the next measure on up, and it would feel strange to me if I were playing. I have to think about it, and if I'm trying to sing a song and I'm thinking about it while I'm going through it, it's not going to work out well. Like I said, unnecessary complexity is being added, which I don't want. And if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, the actual sound of the strum going down is a little different than up, and so that change, that tone color quality change will be heard by at least a seasoned listener. So if I'm going, see, it's so awkward I couldn't even do it right now. Okay, so that is something I just want to emphasize when it comes to your strumming patterns. Being able to really interpret a measure and a groove is going to make your life a lot better. Now we're going off to the right hand. Now I'm going to start talking about the right hand techniques. I have 9 examples of right hand activity that can be employed at various spots on a typical ukulele song. These techniques, of course, are not an exhaustive list. There's plenty others, especially if you talk to a guitarist, but they're the ones that I use most often. And as you move through a piece of music, you're going to want to switch things up a little bit here and there for a song to be more interesting for you and the listener. And we'll talk a little bit more how to do that here in just a minute. For now, focus on developing these different techniques, which will usually take the form of a strumming pattern or a picking pattern. And plan to have a variety of these in your back pocket to access on the spot, if possible, at will. All right, so the first strumming pattern is I'm sure the first one you started doing. It's the one that most people start doing, and it's the one that most people record with when they're on YouTube or they're playing, in public. And it's called the 4 on the floor, or I don't know if that's what it's called. That's what I call it. It's the simplest strumming pattern, and it often makes a nice introduction to whatever song you're playing. So many times I'll just open up with this as an intro or as the first verse, and then you do the second verse or the chorus. That's when you start introducing more sophisticated and advanced strumming patterns or right hand activity. The first measure in the following example shows you the skeletal format, like what the actual rhythm is, and the second measure shows you the strumming pattern. So in this case, it's all down beats or all down strokes or down strums. The strumming direction is the second measure. So here's the 4 on the floor. If I use the thumb. Easy enough. So that's probably the first strumming pattern most people learn, and it works really well. Number 2, or the next the next technique, the next figure below that you're looking at, I call it the golden strum. This is the go-to strum for just about everything you're going to play. Very, very high likelihood you're going to pull this one out. It's just the one that works the best. It's the universal ukulele strum that most players incorporate when accompanying a voice or another instrument. You can't go wrong with this one. So I need to introduce, however, the critical importance of the accent. So when you're playing, let me play the golden strum first just so I stay on task here. So I'm going to switch chords too. So I'm going to play a C, and the rhythm is, that's dun, ja, dun, ja, da, da. Okay? And take a good look at the bow direction, the strumming direction. Down, down, up, and then you got to repeat up again. And as I'm sure you can imagine, most beginning players, and maybe even yourself, you're going, and you're ending up from one measure to the next on a different strumming direction, which you don't want. All right, so let's talk about the accent, because that is a really important little tiny detail that you see there. The accent in the music is it looks like an arrow that's missing the shaft. It looks like just a sideways V. And whenever you see an accent, you put a little more oomph behind it. You give it a little more weight. And that really does help when you're trying to establish a nice solid groove. And it's one of the things that I've noticed with my students that they neglect the most. A lot of people, and sometimes you don't need it. Sometimes you just want to have a strumming pattern that sounds like this. And that's fine. And if you listen to other people who are playing songs on YouTube, that's usually what they're doing. But that little tiny detail of knowing where that accent is very important. If you go, changes everything. It makes everyone just move a little more. So that is what I call the golden strum, and as you're playing through a song and switching chords, you just keep that going for the whole verse. Sorry, let me start again. So there you go. That's the golden strum. That's going to carry you through most of your ukulele life. Now the next technique, or the next figure that we're looking at, is the same idea. It's the same golden strum, but I throw in a little popping sound, which resembles a snare drum, and it's a really, really cool technique. This pop occurs, if you're looking at the music there, of course, you have the first measure, which is showing you just the rhythm. Second measure shows you the strumming direction, the accent, and you'll see a little X right there, and that little X is the snare pop sound. And the way I make that snare pop sound is I just kind of take my hand, and I wish there was a better way to describe this, but I just kind of whack the ukulele like that. I stop the strings from vibrating, and I personally hit right about at the very bottom of the fretboard. Some people do it on the ukulele. Some people do it like that. It could be anywhere, really. I like having it here because my hand is right there ready to go up as soon as I get done doing it. And I kind of, I never really examined it very closely exactly where I hit it, but it's kind of like this part of my thumb hits right there. And so the rest of my fingers are ready to go up. And this is why I spent so much time talking about knowing the strumming direction, because this pattern right here, I mean, it's just a killer. It is a great sounding groove, but you have to know as soon as that X happens in the music and as soon as your hand hits that pop, you're going up. And most people hit it and they want to go down. That's right, because the last strum they did was an upward strum. And so they go to hit it with their hand and they want to go down. And when they go down, you only have 3 more strums left, which is up, down, up. I'm sorry. When you go down, you only have 2 strums left, which is up, down. And then now you're starting a new measure with an up direction strum, which won't work. So hopefully I explained that. So if I'm taking a chord like C, I'm just going to move back and forth between C and A minor. I'll go slow. So here is the actual rhythm. I'm not going to play the pattern yet. Okay, so that is the feel. Now if I go down, down, up, pop, up, down, up. The up after the pop is the most important. That's where most people make the mistake. So you have down, down, up, pop, up, down, up, pop. See where my hand is right there? Up, down, up, pop. Okay, and then the final detail, like I mentioned before, is incorporating that accent. And if you do that, I'm going to switch to A minor. You can incorporate that accent. You've got all the flavors. You got all the ingredients in this awesome cake. So you hear that first downstroke. Let me do it slow first. Sorry. Pop right there. I assure you, if you do that for people, you're going to see everyone doing this because it feels really good. It feels really good to play and it feels really good to listen to, but it's definitely awkward at first getting that pop followed by the up stroke. All right. So the next figure you see, I'm elaborating more on it. It's the same snare pop strum groove, but just written a little differently. So the motion is all the same. It's just kind of the first one is in a regular time and the second one's in more of a double time or a cut time feel. So if I was playing, that's the first measure you're looking at. Second measure, same feel, it's just like that. So that is the snare pop technique. The next technique is one that I use enough, not a whole lot, but enough times, and I personally just call it the claw. It resembles kind of the claw hammer technique that banjo players use, and it's kind of like you're sort of, it's like a claw, like you're sort of grasping the strings like this, and I know this isn't really the most proper way to do it, and I'm sure if I took the time, I'd probably be able to do it properly, but I personally anchor my pinky on the ukulele like it's glued there, and I'm pressing against my body, because I like to make sure that these fingers are exactly where they belong. And so if I anchor my pinky, as you can see there, it's under the sound hole and back about, I don't know, 1.5 inches or so. Then my fingers are, clawing these strings right over the sound hole. Sometimes if I go for a different effect, I'll have the fingers right over the very last part of the fretboard, but I kind of like it right there. And I'm either doing a pattern that involves, pulling with my thumb and index, or sometimes all 3 fingers, or thumb and middle finger. Very rarely have I been using the ring, but it does come up sometimes. So sometimes I use 2 fingers at a time, sometimes 3 fingers. And this later on, we're going to talk about the banjo-like roll, that also is similar to the claw, but you're not kind of grabbing the strings. I'm kind of grabbing them and pulling them outward when I play. Below here is a tab example of what I'm talking about here. So we're cycling through A minor and F and E7. And this thing is making noise, so bye-bye to that. Hopefully I can get by without it for a while. I'm going 80s on you guys. I'm rolling up my suit sleeves. All right, so here is the claw. And it has kind of a cool little, I don't know, kind of like a hip-hop sort of drive to it. I kind of twist it a little bit when I play it. I do something like... So using that little pulling up, sort of like a hawk, the way a hawk goes to the ground and grasps whatever's on the ground. That's kind of what my hand feels like it's doing. And there's a couple other little techniques in there that we'll talk about soon. All right, the next example is kind of like one of my favorite. This is definitely one of my favorites to do, and it's basically like a finger roll on a banjo, and it gives a real refreshing flavor to your accompaniment. And sometimes I call it the arpeggiation, because it sort of feels like you're just playing a strum, but 1 string at a time. But you're going to be going out of order sometimes, so it's not always going to feel like a strum. And you could be doing it with just your thumb when you're doing the arpeggiation sometimes. Sometimes you're going to be alternating between fingers, and there's no real rhyme or reason or formula to always follow. You're just going to have to kind of, experiment with it and find out what order you're going to play the strings and with what fingers and stuff. And the simplest form, we're going to take a look at the next figure here, which has 3 examples. And the simplest form of playing that is going to be just cycling through chords and playing arpeggiation from the first string to the last string. And then example number 2 cycles through the same chords, but I'm changing the order a little bit. And this sort of makes a different effect. It's basically the same sound with using the same chords, but it delivers something different. And example number 3 again cycles through the same chords, but now we're incorporating more of a finger type roll, banjo-esque pattern. So now listen to the differences in these 3 examples. My left hand's doing the same thing. It's just cycling through the same chords, and it's doing so at the same time every time. But just these little changes you can make in the right hand make a big difference. So we're looking at D minor, B major 7, 6, and A7. Now I'm going to check my tuning here real quick. Okay, so D minor, B flat major 7, C6, and A7. Here's just the regular old arpeggiation. Repeat. Good. Example number 2, same chords, same strings, just a different order. Sounds different. And then number 3, example number 3 is now incorporating kind of a different rhythm using the finger roll. Makes it sound much, I think, cooler. Sorry. Especially if you add a little accent on that. I'm doing it on the 4th little quick note there, the 4th 16th note. So, especially if you take it up speed. So, I should mention the concept of voice leading, which I was doing a little bit on that last example, and the loose textbook definition is the linear progression of melodic lines. So as I'm playing all that stuff, there are certain strings and certain notes that I'm playing that are following a pattern that I'm considering while I go through it. And the simplest off-the-cuff way to describe voice leading is how certain notes are moving along. And there is actually a rhyme and a reason and a theory and a science behind it, and it can make you or break you when you're playing music. So it is a topic that does require, I wouldn't say a great deal of study, but a lot. And I just wanted to drop that little nugget for you so that you know. And again, you can figure all this out when you study on your own, in your own tutorials. Continuing with our banjo-esque roll technique, let's add a little more complexity still. There are 2 more examples below, number 4 and number 5, and each one of them have an additional technique added to the chord progression. Example 4 introduces double stops, which just means you're playing 2 notes at once, or in this case, you're going to be grabbing 2 notes at once. The last example is 4 measures long instead of 2 measures long, and although the progression is the same, each chord is a full measure now each time. And we haven't reached the chapter on left-hand techniques yet, so if you don't know what they are yet, you're not going to know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to throw them in so you can hear all the different other stuff that you can add to, more flavor, more spice. That's what I like. I like more sugar and more spice, makes everything nice. So just more things you can add into your groove. So here's example 4. This is with the double stops. Do that, if you're playing a song, and you're going. I'm just trying to think of a song that fits, but it's okay. So you're strumming, and you break down some kind of bridge. And now I'm trying to talk while I'm playing, which is a bad idea. So you're strumming. You want to break it down to some kind of bridge. Guarantee that'll grasp your listener. If you're playing a song and you're transitioning into some kind of breakdown, it adds a lot. So now here's the same thing. I'm gonna play each chord for a whole measure now, and in measure 1 I'm gonna incorporate a hammer. In measure 2 is also a hammer. Measure 3 has a trill, like that, and then measure 4 has a slide, where I'm sliding up the neck here. So that sounds like this. You throw that down in one of your bridges, you're going to get some attention. Remember, we started as this. There's nothing wrong with that, but it ain't this. That's pretty cool. So let's go on to the next one. Next example below is, it's not very difficult to decipher if you're reading it, but it is difficult to play. Not only is it kind of crucial to lock in that strong accent on beats 2 and 4, but it can take a toll on your forearm if you haven't built up your endurance. So this is the fast swing technique, and it's a riot. I love it, especially if you're really burning, which I do a lot. So let me take a little side note and talk about vibrato for a second. And it doesn't really have anything to do with this, but the principle is the same, for a different reason. A lot of people think that vibrato, and in fact I thought this too, vibrato in the human voice is where your vocal cords are shaking. And from what I understand, that's not true. What I was told was that vibrato is, you have inside your throat, everyone calls it the voice box, but the scientific name for it is the larynx. And the larynx is what houses your vocal cords. And I was told that when your muscles are, the wrong word to use is relaxed, but I'm going to use the word relaxed for the time being. When your muscles are relaxed is when your larynx sort of suspends on whatever it's holding on to. Instead of kind of your muscles gripping everything trying to sing, it suspends, and then it sort of kind of swings like a kid on a swing set, And when it starts swinging like that, it starts to vibrate, and that's where you get the fluctuation of the vibrato coming out and when you're hearing it. And I suppose the better word is, like, when a singer develops to a level of maturity, they start using their muscles, or there's no more straining, and you're properly poised. A lot like posture, right? When you're sitting up straight and you have really good posture, you don't feel quote unquote relaxed, like you're slouching on the couch with your back curved and everything. You feel the muscles working, but they're poised properly. They're functioning exactly as they're intended to, and it actually does end up feeling relaxed when you're sitting properly, or when you're standing properly, or walking properly with good posture. So the same is true with the human voice, and that's why it's the God-given creation of the human voice. When it gets to that level of maturity, that sends out that sound that's fluctuating, that frequency that reaches your ear, and your ear, crazy enough as it sounds, it intuitively understands that what's coming at you is coming at you in full development, full force, full soothing quality. And that soothing quality sends a signal to your brain that says, I'm hearing vibrato, which in itself is like mind-blowing to me sometimes. But the reason I'm telling you this is because the same thing similar shows up when you're playing fast swing, because if you're doing it with everything tensed up, you're just going to be shaking your hand back and forth super fast, and you're going to feel a lot of strain, and you're going to run out of gas very soon. And what I started noticing about my arm and my hand is that it started to take kind of a piston motion, or in the engine, the part that holds you have the piston that moves up and down super fast, and then you have all these other pieces and parts that are not only moving slower, but in kind of a circular motion like this, which is what my arm does when I'm starting to play really fast. So if you look at this example here, the one that says fast swing, and if I'm going, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can't see myself right now, but I have a feeling I'm not doing this. Right, where you can see everything in my body getting tense and my hands all, stiff and firm like this. You want this kind of, and again, I don't like using the word relaxed because it isn't relaxing, so to speak, but it looks more fluid, So there you go. That's the fast swing, and I love the fast swing. And I do want to mention that you can play it by just holding the chord, which is fine. I also do this thing where I just kind of lift up just a little bit and kind of choke the strings just for a very brief moment and give it kind of that muffled effect. So I don't know if you can hear that, but slow motion is I'm squeezing. So I'm lifting, squeezing, lifting, squeezing, lifting, squeezing. And something you can also try out. And then we can do fast swing with a hammer on. We haven't learned the hammer on yet with the left hand, but it means I'm lifting up my finger and then hammering down on the string, which we'll talk about. Here is the same chord progression now with just some hammers included. Still on the fast swing topic, below is a weapon that I take out occasionally. I usually employ this technique with a section of the music that's building in intensity, which I'll show you on some songs later on. And this is more of a technique I pull out for a regular sort of swing feel or a regular swing speed. But I wanted to showcase the technique specifically because of a little adjustment you have to make for it. And that adjustment is normally, like I said, we like to start a measure on a down strum, but in this case, since we're going to be accenting beats 2 and 4, it actually is one of the few times that I begin a measure with an up strum, so that by the time I reach beat 2, my hand is going down because we are doing fast triplets. This is the fast triplet swing, or the fast swing triplet form, or sometimes I call it the sextuplet form, depending on how you're interpreting it. So, in this case, I'm going to, if I was doing it wrong, it would be. Down, up, but I want to feel like I'm hitting the strum downward on beat 2, so I'm going to go, I'll do it slow motion first. So if I was playing a song that was, I'd be going 1, 2, 3, 4. Except that sounded like trash. I would be going 1, 2, 3, 4. That's kind of cool. So if you're doing, if you're playing a song, beep beep boo, beep beep boo, beep beep boo, beep beep boo. All right. So sometimes I play pieces that call for a little spicy Latin flavor, and I love every minute of it. Luckily, there's no major different techniques in the right hand that we need to cover. Just be aware that there is heavy emphasis on that snare pop that I was talking about when I play Latin kind of stuff, as well as confident familiarity with the upbeats and syncopation, accents, the proper strumming direction. All this really comes into play when you're dealing with this kind of stuff. So below, we're looking at 3 different examples here of Havana. And the first example is kind of your standard sort of Latin groove. And the second example is essentially the identical, progression, pattern, and groove, but with certain beats omitted, and which will require some kind of mental gymnastics and adjustments on your part. And the last one employs a couple of left-hand techniques too that we haven't talked about yet. But here is, Havana. This is example 1, just kind of your regular Latin feel, So I'm doing that pop and then upward after. So pop and then up. And I get a little buzzing sound that's kind of driving me crazy. And that's kind of neat. Then we have example 2 where I'm going down strum, pop, up. I would be going down here next, but now that's omitted while I switch my chord, and then pop again, and then I'm going up for D7, down is the rest, up again, pop, up, rest, and then up again. So it's, you're doing a lot of these up motions towards your face. And that's it's funky. Sorry. Oh, I added an extra one there, sorry. All right, so that's example 2. Taking a look now at example 3, we have the G minor going down. Pop snare, I'm going to hit this upward and then slide my finger up to the next chord, which is E flat, pop, D7, another D7 with a repeated up strum, pop, rest, and then another pop followed by a hammer like that. Upward strum plus a hammer. Kind of crazy. So. And I forgot to count it off so you can feel the beat. 1, 2, ready, and. So all those little changes here and there changes the funkiness. And I mentioned this briefly above, but I wanted to dedicate one more example to it. I call this last example just the go-to Latin drive technique. And this is usually what I play on a Latin tune when I reach kind of the chorus or another section that has a good drive behind it. It's not really necessary for it to be a fast section. In fact, it sounds really nice at a medium tempo. It is the same technique as the fast swing, but you just play it slower, which I understand is a giant contradiction, but I think you understand what I mean. Latin music is usually not swung in the eighth notes, but has a heavy second and fourth beat. And during this technique, I tend to over-exaggerate that snare popping sound, as you just saw. I'm like, beating the snot out of this thing. But in a Latin band, that popping sound would be mimicking the slap tone on the conga and then the open tone boop boop on beat 4. And for those who are familiar with the genre, that'll make sense. And if you're not, don't worry about it. It's going to work, trust me. So here's the Latin drive groove for the right hand strum, which is down, up, pop, up, down, up, pop, up, down, up, pop, over and over again. So 1, 2, ready, and. So let's go ahead and apply this a little bit. I'll take Havana, and you'll have to forgive me. I don't really know the words that great, but I'll show you how I would use it if I was actually playing this tune. And I would start with the groove. And I would sing a verse. And then when it got to the driving part, the ooh, I would do the, just kind of hit it. Just So, for example, Havana, oh na na. He took my heart back in Havana, oh na na. He took me back to East Atlanta, oh na na. Oh, but my heart is in Havana. There's something about his manners, Havana, oh na. Even way up on that, how you doing? This is what I can do with. I knew him forever in a minute. Papa says he's got Milo in him. That's how I would do it. All right, so that about does it for the right hand techniques. We're going on to our next chapter, which is the left hand techniques. See you there. By mere Bistouchain, this age-old refrain, it means I am begging for your hand. I could say Bella, Bella, even say Wunderbar. Each language only tells me how grand you are. I've tried to explain by mere Bistouchain, so kiss me and say you understand.